Sitting on her bed, Nawel held a new notebook in her hands. She liked the simple midnight blue cover. She had always loved writing, but this time it was different. This journal wouldn't be a simple notebook, but her refuge, the place where she could put down her thoughts without fear of being judged. She grabbed her pen and wrote the first words on the blank page. Today, I decided to write down what I feel since no one seems to be listening to me. She paused for a moment, hesitant. Writing about her loneliness made it a heavier reality, but also more bearable. In her house, everything was noisy. Her parents' conversations, her siblings' laughter. Yet she felt invisible. No one asked her questions. No one seemed to notice her silence. Through these pages, she hoped to feel a little less alone. Nawel closed her journal after a few sentences. She slipped it under her pillow like a precious secret. This notebook would become her confidant, her only true friend in a world where she felt she existed only in the shadows. Every morning, Nawel woke up with the same feeling of emptiness. She went downstairs to breakfast, where her family was already busy. Her father, absorbed in his journal, almost never looked up at her. Her mother, always in a hurry, talked to others without ever saying a word to her. As for her brothers and sisters, they seemed to live in a world where she didn't exist. She then went off to high school, a place where she blended into the crowd. In class, she was a quiet student, the one no one really cared about. Even when she tried to participate, her voice seemed to get lost in the surrounding noise. She had no close friends, only acquaintances with whom she exchanged pleasantries. In the evening, the ritual was the same. She would come home, lock herself in her room, and open her journal. It had become her escape, the only thing that allowed her to exist other than in silence. She wrote down every detail of her monotonous days, secretly hoping that one day something would come along to shake up this oppressive routine. But for now, the days passed all the same, without the slightest spark of change. Nawel closed her journal and put down her pen with a sigh. Every night she poured her thoughts, her sorrows, and her hopes into it, but it wasn't enough. Her heart was heavy with an unease she couldn't express any other way. Sometimes she wanted to scream, to shake those around her to make them understand that she was suffering. But she knew no one would truly listen to her. She got up and went to her bedroom window, watching the city lights. Behind every lit window there was a family, laughter, conversations. Why did she feel so alienated in her own home? Why didn't anyone notice how withdrawn she was? Her phone vibrated. She hoped for a second for a message that would break her isolation, but it was just an unimportant notification. Disappointed, she put her phone on her nightstand and went back to bed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't yet know that soon an encounter would change everything. An unexpected event would break the wall of silence she had built for herself. But for now, she was alone with her thoughts, trapped in her own silent scream. Every evening, after finishing her homework, Nawel sat down at her desk and opened her journal. This ritual had become her only moment of respite, a bubble where she could finally be herself. With her pen, she traced the contours of her thoughts, letting the ink absorb her grief and loneliness. She wrote everything down: the absent gazes of her parents, the heavy silences at the dinner table, the feeling of being a ghost in her own house. Each word placed on the paper was a cry she couldn't express aloud. Her journal was her confidant, the one that didn't judge her, the one that never interrupted her. Sometimes she reread her own writings and wondered if someone else, somewhere, might feel the same way. Was she the only one who felt so invisible? Her heart told her not, but no one around her seemed to understand what she was going through. That evening, as she closed her journal, she took a deep breath. Writing brought her comfort, but it was no longer enough. A question crossed her mind. What if someone read her words? Would it change anything? One evening, as she opened her journal, Nawel had a different idea. Rather than simply writing about her day, she decided to write a letter. But not just any letter, a letter to an imaginary person, someone who would understand her. Every day, she wrote new letters, addressed to this invisible friend. Sometimes she imagined that he or she would respond, giving her advice, comforting her in her moments of distress. These one-way exchanges had become a habit, a way for her to feel less alone. But despite everything, one thought persisted in her mind. What if she could really talk to someone? Perhaps these letters were just the beginning, a practice run-up before she finally dared to open up to the real world. One night, while rereading one of her letters, Nawel felt a strange emotion overcome her. Her own words suddenly seemed more powerful, as if they were coming to life. For the first time in a long time, she felt as if something could change, that her story wouldn't always be one of solitude and silence. She wondered then, what if she shared her writings with someone? Maybe there was someone out there who would understand what she was feeling. The idea terrified her as much as it excited her. Until now, her journal and letters had been nothing more than secret refugees, but perhaps it was time to make them something bigger. The next day, during recess, Nawel took out her notebook and reread one of her letters. The noise of the school surrounded her, but she was locked in her own bubble, hesitant. Should she show her writing to someone? Publish a text anonymously online? Leave a letter somewhere, hoping a kind soul would find it? For the first time, she glimpsed a light at the end of the tunnel. Could her words finally connect her to the world? For days, Nawel had noticed only the blurred faces around her. Yet that morning, as she entered the schoolyard, something had changed. She noticed a young boy who seemed to be observing her discreetly, but in a way that was different from the others. His eyes weren't shifty or indifferent, but curious and kind. Nawel immediately looked away, surprised by this attention she wasn't used to receiving. She suddenly felt uncomfortable, as if his gaze had torn through the wall of her isolation. But every time she met his eyes, a slight smile appeared on her lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but sincere. This boy seemed to see her differently. She wondered why he was looking at her like that. Perhaps he had noticed her loneliness. Perhaps he was just trying to get to know her, or perhaps like her, he felt trapped by his own silence. When the bell rang, Nawel rushed into her classroom, feeling slightly lost in her thoughts. This gaze, however fleeting, disturbed her. She wasn't used to being perceived as a person, someone worthy of attention. What if this boy was the key to a change she'd been waiting for so long? Days passed, and Nawel couldn't help but think back to that look. Every morning, she secretly hoped to once again encounter the man who had dared to look at her differently. One Thursday, as she approached her locker, she saw him. He was there, a few feet away, chatting with a group of students. When their eyes met, a moment of silence fell. He smiled at her, and without really knowing why, Nawel felt able to return the smile. She timidly walked toward him. He moved slightly away from the group, offering her a gap. When she reached his side, he made a slight gesture, like a silent invitation to speak. She hesitated, then stammered, her voice softer than she'd expected. "Hi, my name's Nawel." He smiled wider, as if he'd been waiting for her. "I'm Yasser. I've seen you a few times, and I noticed you seemed—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Isolated. I thought it might be good if we talked for a bit." Nawel felt as if suspended in time. Her eyes shone with a new light, hope tentatively anchored in her heart. Maybe she wasn't invisible after all. In the following days, Nawel and Yasser often crossed paths in the hallways, exchanged a few words at recess, and sometimes they found themselves chatting after class. Nawel began to feel comfortable in his presence. Yasser, with his kindness and attentive listening, seemed to understand her silences better than anyone. He didn't ask intrusive questions, but knew exactly when to offer her a shoulder to lean on, without judgment. Little by little, an invisible bond was woven between them, like a delicate but strong thread. Nawel realized that, unlike everyone else, Yasser didn't look at her as a stranger. He saw her as she was, without trying to change her, without judging her flaws. She felt both protected and free with him, as if their meeting was the beginning of something she had always longed for without really knowing it. One evening, as she was leaving school, Yasser asked her to accompany him to a park. Together they walked in silence, but this silence was comfortable, carrying a new kind of complicity. Nawel realized then that there were still people who could see beyond appearances, and perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had thought. As the weeks went by, Nawel and Yasser spent more and more time together, their friendship strengthening every day. Nawel found herself looking forward to their discussions, those moments when she could finally be herself without having to hide behind facades. Yasser, with his patience and kindness, offered her a space where she felt accepted, unconditionally. He often spoke to her about his passions and his dreams, and Nawel felt more and more comfortable sharing hers. They would meet after school to walk together in the park or sit on a bench, chatting about their respective lives or even simply enjoying the comfortable silence they shared. For Nawel, these moments were becoming essential, almost therapeutic. She felt that little by little she could confide in him pieces of her heart, thoughts she had never dared to share with anyone. One afternoon, as they sat under a large tree, Nawel felt strangely vulnerable, but at the same time, a gentle warmth filled her heart. She had found in Yasser someone she could truly trust. Despite her growing trust in Yasser, Nawel knew she couldn't reveal everything to him immediately. Every moment spent with him left a void behind her, a part of herself she still didn't dare to address. The shadows of her past still haunted her, memories buried in her heart, too painful to share. Her family history, her childhood marked by her parents' indifference, and the isolation she suffered were subjects she had never dared to discuss with anyone. One day, as they walked the streets of the neighborhood, Yasser spoke of his own family difficulties. He confided in her that, despite a sometimes strained relationship with his parents, he had learned to understand and forgive them. His touching story prompted a question in Nawel. And me? When will I be able to talk about this past that I hide at all costs? But the idea of revealing the truth, of talking about her pain, paralyzed her. She was afraid of being perceived as fragile, of losing this new connection she had built with Yasser. She changed the subject, but in her heart, a decision was beginning to form. Perhaps the time would come when she would be ready to face her demons. As the weeks passed, Nawel began to understand that true freedom came not only from physical distance, but from an inner liberation. With Yasser by her side, she felt able to face the wounds of the past that had imprisoned her. It wasn't easy, but each moment shared with him seemed to lighten her burden. Yasser encouraged her without pressure, offering a listening ear without judgment. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench, Nawel felt it was time. She took a deep breath and began to speak, softly at first, then more and more freely. She told him about her childhood, the loneliness she had experienced, the lack of attention from her parents, the heavy silences that had marked her days. Each word that left her mouth seemed to break a little further the chains that had held her captive for so many years. Yasser listened attentively, without interrupting, without looking away. His support was a soft light that warmed her soul. When Nawel finished, a heavy silence fell between them, but this silence was no longer one of solitude. It was one of understanding, forgiveness, and acceptance. Nawel realized that she had just taken a decisive step towards her recovery. Everything seemed to be going well between Nawel and Yasser until that fateful day when a misunderstanding erupted. While they were chatting peacefully after class, Nawel, a little too tired and emotional, blurted out words she didn't really mean. Speaking of her parents, she blurted out without thinking, "Maybe if my parents were a little more interested in me, I wouldn't need to confide in you." This remark, although delivered in a tone of frustration, struck Yasir to the heart. He had always been there for her, but this sentence made him doubt the sincerity of their friendship. He replied abruptly, "It's easy to expect everything from others, Nawel. Maybe you should start taking control of yourself." The cold tone of his reply was like a stab in Nawel's heart. She had never meant to hurt him, but the words had broken the barrier of patience. An awkward silence fell between them, and each went their separate ways, feeling a heavy weight in their hearts. Nawel, shocked by this reaction, wondered if their friendship would survive this difficult moment. The following days were marked by silence and unease. Nawel avoided Yasser, taking refuge in the isolation of her thoughts. Every time she met his gaze, a strange distance seemed to separate them. The memory of their exchanged words weighed heavily on her shoulders, and she wondered if she had ruined everything. She thought back to her clumsy remark and Yasser's tone, which had hurt her more deeply than she had imagined. She found herself alone with her emotions, a solitude she hadn't experienced in a long time. Her thoughts swirled. Why had she said that? She knew she had never meant to hurt Yasser, but now, the absence of their daily interactions made her suffer. The loss of his spontaneous conversations, his smiles, and the closeness they had shared reminded her how important he had become in her life. On the other hand, Nawel wondered if Yasser felt the same way. Maybe he wouldn't come back. Maybe he needed time to digest what she had said. What if this mistake marked the end of their friendship? These questions invaded her mind, and the silence that had settled between them became increasingly difficult to bear. After a few days, Nawel could no longer bear this oppressive silence. She realized that in order to move forward, she had to confront her fears and doubts. She gathered her courage and decided to talk to Yasser. The next day, she looked for him after class. When she found him, he seemed hesitant, as if waiting for her to make the first move. She approached him, her heart pounding. "Yasser," she began in a trembling voice, "I'm really sorry for what I said the other day. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to hurt you." Yasser looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with questions. He took a deep breath before answering. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Nawel, but what you said made me think. It was like you were rejecting me after everything we'd shared." Nawel felt a wave of guilt wash over her, but at the same time, she felt a sense of relief. She knew this conversation was necessary to mend what had been broken. "I understand, Yasser, and I'm truly sorry. I care about you more than you know." A silence fell, but this time it held hope. After their difficult conversation, Nawel felt the weight of acceptance. She had made the decision to open up and acknowledge her mistakes, but it wasn't easy. The idea of confronting her own failings unnerved her, especially with Yasser, someone she cared about deeply. She blamed herself for letting her negative emotions dictate her words. But at the same time, she understood that accepting her mistakes was the only way to move forward. The following days were filled with deep reflection. Nawel understood that acceptance meant not only acknowledging her faults, but also embracing her imperfections and weaknesses. This lesson was crucial. She was no longer the teenager who withdrew into silence to escape the pain. She was learning to cope, forgive herself, and grow through her mistakes. Yasser, for his part, was in no rush to resolve everything immediately. He knew that trust and understanding were slowly rebuilt. He had accepted his own limitations and understood that Nawel needed time. Their relationship was no longer the same fragile bond it had been at the beginning, but a constantly evolving path, where mutual acceptance would be the key to their reconciliation. After several days of reflection and dialogue, Nawel and Yasser began to find a new form of complicity. Their friendship, though shaken by the misunderstanding, seemed to be reborn, this time on a more solid foundation. They had gotten to know each other better and understood each other's weaknesses. Their exchanges were more sincere, more open, and each was willing to offer the other a new chance. One afternoon, while they were meeting in the park, Yasser suggested they take a walk to chat with Nawel. The atmosphere was light, the smiles more frequent, and the weight of the past seemed to be growing less and less. Nawel, who had always maintained a certain reserve, let herself go, talking about her hopes, her dreams, and what she expected from life. Yasser, attentive, listened to her kindly, offering her sincere encouragement. This simple but powerful moment marked a true turning point in their friendship. Nawel felt ready to face the world with a new perspective. She had realized that true change comes from within, from the willingness to grow and accept others as they are, with their mistakes and imperfections. This new beginning was not just a reconciliation between two friends, but an act of healing and renewal. Over time, Nawel realized that reconciliation with Yasser was only the first step on a much longer path, that of inner healing. She began to understand that to rebuild herself, she also needed to reconcile with herself. The feeling of loneliness that had long gripped her began to dissipate, replaced by a form of peace she had never known before. She took the time to reflect on her past, her relationships, and her wounds. She understood that Yasir's friendship, while precious, could not fill all the emptiness she sometimes felt. This emptiness could only be filled through personal work, an inner journey that would help her understand herself, accept her imperfections, and grow. As the weeks passed, Nawel felt stronger, more serene. She rediscovered a part of herself she had lost in the turmoil of her emotions. She began to appreciate her moments of solitude, to see them not as a curse but as opportunities to know herself better. The road to recovery was long, but it was also liberating, and Nawel knew she was ready to move forward, surrounded by the sincere relationships she had built, with Yasser by her side. One sunny afternoon, Nawel decided to break away from her usual routine and go for a stroll to the local market. It was a lively place filled with colors, laughter, and scents that pleasantly disorientated her. It was there, among the fruit and vegetable stalls, that she encountered someone who would radically change her worldview. His name was Malik, a young man, casually dressed in a cotton shirt and jeans, with a genuine smile and a twinkle in his eye. There was something special about him, a quiet, warm aura that effortlessly drew others in. Nawel didn't know why, but upon meeting his gaze, she immediately felt a connection. Malik was there at a stand, talking to the vendors as if he'd known them forever, but that wasn't what caught Nawel's attention. It was his manner, his calm confidence, and his openness that fascinated her. They exchanged a few words about the market's products, then, as if nothing had happened, Malik suggested she join him for coffee to chat further. Nawel, hesitant at first, finally accepted. She felt curious, a little nervous, but also excited by this unexpected encounter. It was the beginning of an adventure that would transform her outlook on life. At the cafe, Nawel was surprised by the ease with which the conversation flowed between her and Malik. It was as if they'd known each other for years, even though they'd barely met. Malik was different from the other guys she'd met. He had a natural curiosity that led him to ask deep questions while listening attentively to the answers. Talking about their respective lives, Nawel discovered that Malik had lived in several countries and had a much more open world view than the one she had always known. He told her about his travels, his experiences, the people he had met, and the cultures he had explored. It was fascinating, and for the first time in a long time, Nawel felt like she was opening a door to a world she didn't know. He explained to her the importance of stepping out of her comfort zone and confronting the unknown in order to grow. His words resonated deeply within her, shaking the certainties she had built up over the years. Malik encouraged her to pursue her dreams without fear of the unknown, to take risks, to come out of her shell. It was a new concept for Nawel, but it was exactly what she needed to move forward. The days that followed this meeting marked a turning point for Nawel. The conversation she had had with Malik still resonated in her mind, like a distant echo. She realized that her world, so small and predictable until then, could, in reality, be much larger and more fascinating. She began to see things differently, to look beyond her habits and her fears. Little by little, she integrated Malik's ideas into her life. She embarked on projects she would never have imagined before, such as joining discussion groups on topics that interested her, or even signing up for creative workshops. Nawel discovered that she had unsuspected talents and that she could, in fact, explore forgotten passions. Meeting Malik hadn't just offered her a new perspective, it had opened the door to infinite possibilities. Every day was now an adventure, another step into the unknown, which she was learning to embrace with enthusiasm. Nawel felt free, ready to take risks and engage in enriching experiences. This new phase of her life, bolder and full of discovery, gave her the confidence she had long sought. The journey had only just begun, and she was determined to make the most of it.